whoever's running your advertising for you is likely reporting on something called return on ad spend, or ROAS. You might even be completely familiar with what ROAS means, and this video is not primarily about how ROAS works. I'll introduce that briefly, but I want to primarily talk about how both of these numbers that you see on the screen can be somewhat misleading, and I'll explain why. So what ROAS is here is they might tell you something like, for Facebook and Instagram, or they might use the term Meta, you are making $4.10 per dollar invested, or a 4.1x ROAS, and with Google, a 3.9x ROAS. Now, these numbers are fairly decent, depending on your industry and depending on where you are in scaling your advertising, but they are also somewhat inflated, at least in the scenario that we're going to show today. By the way, if somebody is not reporting on this for you and they're running your ads, make sure that you insist on this. This is something that is fairly easy to track these days, and it's something that both the platform and the people running the platform need to know in order to make sure that these are being managed well. In order to understand the problem that we're going to be talking about today, we have to start with how do these different platforms report on revenue against the campaigns that are being run? And the answer is that they each have an attribution model. It's just a calculation where they determine when a particular purchase gets counted against a campaign and when it doesn't. The way that Facebook and Instagram work is if somebody clicks on one of the ads shown in those platforms within the 7 days leading up to the purchase, or they just view an ad within 1 day leading up to the purchase, Facebook and Instagram are going to say that revenue gets counted against the campaign. So when it's trying to tell you how much money you made from that campaign, that's how they're making the determination of how much revenue is generated. Google Ads will do something similar. They use a different attribution model by default, a 30-day click attribution, a 1-day view, and they have another special attribution window for what they call engaged video views. So let's take a look at just a single platform to simplify things. So we talked about this 4.1x return on ad spend for the Meta platform. How did this happen? You can see that on July 1st, you started showing ads to somebody on the Facebook and Instagram platforms and showed them an ad about once per day leading up to the purchase on July 11th. The last time they viewed an ad was 1 day prior to that purchase, which fits within Meta's 1 day view through attribution model. Therefore, that's counted against the spend. So a $579 purchase, this is just one purchase in our scenario, against $140 in spend, gives you a return on ad spend of 4.1. But let's look at the full scenario. I'm going to call this more realistic in one way and less realistic in another. It's more realistic in the sense that you probably are running multiple platforms. It's less realistic because this is contrived. It's ultra simplified in order to illustrate the problem. So Facebook and Instagram are reporting this 4.1x ROAS from what we just saw, and Google at the same time for the same person for the same purchase is reporting $150 in spend, that same $579 in value, and therefore a 3.9x ROAS. But in our scenario, we know that this purchase was the same person in the same purchase. So if we want to truly evaluate our return on ad spend, we're going to take that $579 and divide it by the $290 in total spend between the two platforms rather than doing it individually. Now, when we do that, we can see that $579 in revenue is generated against $290 in ad spend, resulting in a ROAS of 2.0. Let's take a closer look at how this scenario plays out. So we have that July 1st, where we started showing the ads on Facebook, and you can see Instagram, and now they clicked on an ad on Google on July 4th. Then they continued seeing these ads on Facebook and Instagram with that last view on July 10th and the purchase on July 11th. Because of this view within 1 day, of course, Facebook or Meta is taking credit for that here, which we already talked about. And because this click happened within 30 days of the purchase, Google also is taking credit for it. And that's where you see both of them taking 100% credit for, or I should say, attributing 100% of the value against the ads that were shown on each platform. And here you can see the calculations broken down like what we showed up here. The reason I want you to know about this is so that you can have a better true view of how much you are making on your ads. So the more platforms you're running, the more you have to be aware of this. And even really with just 2 platforms, depending on how much overlap you have between the 2, this could be, you could end up with a very different return on ad spend if you're looking at this in a combined way rather than on individual platforms. Now, this is a contrived scenario. Not all purchases are double counted. Not all individuals are going to be shown ads by both platforms. This was ultra simplified to illustrate the issue. So your scenario is going to be different than what I painted here, and any given company in a different market or industry might have a different result. It really depends on your targeting and things like that. Another consideration is how much profit did you make? That $579 purchase, it's nice to see that against, say, $290 in ad spend, and you feel like this is great. $579 in value, $290 in ad spend, I feel like I'm doubling my money. Well, that's not exactly true because you're not pocketing all of that money. You are making your margin on that $579. You need to consider whether this is additive revenue or not. What I mean by that is you need to understand if you have fixed versus variable costs for this particular experience. So if you're a zipline company and adding one more person, or let's say this $579 represented 3 or 4 people, and adding them to your roster for that day didn't require you to hire any more guys or pay any more overtime or incur any additional costs really, then it's fine to look at that $579 against that extra spend. And you can see that that's a pretty good return if you're able to double your money, unless you have a way to do better than doubling your money in another way. But not everybody is in that situation. Sometimes when you add some people to your roster for that day, there are extra costs that are incurred, this is especially true of food tours and others. So you need to really understand as you're looking at your return on spend, how much money am I really making from this to make sure that you are really being profitable. Along those lines, how much did ad management cost? Return on ad spend factors in only ad spend, not management of that ad spend. So some clients will want reporting on return on marketing spend or ROMs. Next, how much ad attributed revenue came in offline? We have some clients that have a lot of their revenue coming in offline. We know that the ads are influencing how many people come in and purchase online or on the phone, and that information might never be sent to the ad platforms, which means that the ad platforms are underreporting their value, not at least in some way. We talked about possibly overreporting because of this overlap, but it could also be underreporting by not factoring in all of the revenue that was generated by or influenced by ads. Now, if you have enough information about these purchases, it is possible to upload that information to the platforms. Just make sure you're not uploading what the platforms already know about. But if you upload offline revenue only, if you have enough information for those platforms to match your customers with their customers or their users, then they're able to look back in the data and find out whether they showed an ad to that person, when they showed the ads, how much it costs to show those ads, and therefore they're able to pair that up and have that factor in as part of the return on ad spend calculation. Next, did you spend money trying to drive leads, and did you track that value? We have some clients that spend a lot of their money on public tours and ones that can be booked online. That information gets back to the platforms, it gets factored into ROAS. But if you're trying to drive leads for private tours or for group sales, then you might not be asking people to book online, but rather submit a form or something like that. If you are spending money to try to help drive leads, or even if you're not spending money specifically to drive leads, but sometimes lead generation is happening from people who became aware of you through your ads. If you are not sending lead value back to those platforms, you are undervaluing the total output of or the outcomes of your ad investments as well. So anything that has monetary value or even inferred monetary value like leads is something that you want to factor in when you're looking at your return on ad spend. one final tip here. Let's go back to the core issue here that we were talking about, and that is this overlap. How do you deal with this overlap in a way where you can actually report on to X? How do you know what number to use if you can't look at the platforms themselves and you want to know what this number is? The way that we do that is we look at Google Analytics. Google Analytics can tell us how much revenue came in from ads. There's a couple of different ways that you can do that. We recommend using a data-driven attribution model so that the ads get the proper amount of credit regardless of whether they were the last click in someone's journey to purchase. So you can look at how much revenue came in through advertising and how much Google Ads attributes to the different platforms, the different sources of traffic. And you can divide that number by your total ad spend. So it takes a little bit of work to do this, but we've set this up so that this is something that we can report on a regular basis for any time period without doing any extra work. And it's just something that's on our dashboards. Now, the drawback with this, and one of the weaknesses, is it's quite possible for your ads to influence purchases when nobody even ever clicks on an ad to visit your website. If somebody didn't click on an ad, let's say that they saw a Facebook or Instagram ad, and then they came in through Google search and went to your website. In that case, Google Analytics is not aware that the advertising platform had any influence on that purchase. So to some degree, that's undercounting the value of ads. So I call that the ultra conservative return on ad spend, or ROAS. So that's just something that you can watch as one of your metrics as you're trying to figure out, how are my ads performing for me? I hope this has been helpful. Let me know if you have any questions.